Welcome to the 2016 Emerging Leader Awards. My name is Myra Beers, and I'm Director of Operations for the Center for Leadership. And I'm pleased that you all have chosen to come here today and hear one of our very outstanding young leaders in our community share his experience with you and his vision for the future. A little bit about the Emerging Leader Awards. It was established by the Center in 2013 to recognize dynamic, new generation of leaders in our community. We would like to thank the Alva H. and Wileen P. Chapman Foundation for their generous sponsorship of this award. You'll hear more about that a little bit later. I am also delighted this afternoon to recognize several distinguished members of our community. And they're with us today because they so appreciate the work that Vance and his team are doing on behalf of our community. First of all, I'd like to recognize Nathan Hiller, Dr. Nathan Hiller, who's in the front here, who is the academic and kind of the research head of our center and provides us the vision for what the Center for Leadership should be focusing on. I'd also like to recognize Mr. David Lawrence, Jr., President of the Early Childhood Initiative and Chairman of the Children's Movement of Florida, who's in the front row here with us. Mr. Javier Alberto Soto, President and CEO of the Miami Foundation. Mr. Beecham Cicheran, a member of the Center's Board of Advisors, and you'll hear more from him a little bit later. Dale Chapman Webb, who joins us today on behalf of the Alva H. and Wileen P. Chapman Foundation, which honors her grandparents. And Dean Leslie Northrup, Dean of our FIU Honors College, with whom many of our students today are Honors College students, and we welcome you here. Executive Director of the FIU School of Education, Laura Deinhardt, who's in the front here, and the team members of the Children's Movement of Florida. Thank you all for your hard work, and let's have a round of applause for them. Thank you. Today we are also joined by an outstanding group of FIU students. We especially invited students who have excelled academically to join us today, not only as a recognition of their achievements, but also as a reminder of the promise they hold for the future of our community. We are delighted that you are here this afternoon. Will all of our FIU students please stand up and be recognized? It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce Javier Soto, President and CEO of the Miami Foundation. Under Javier's leadership, the Miami Foundation has focused on investing in the community through philanthropy that improves the quality of life for our Miami. We are particularly proud that Javier is an alumnus of the Leading Decisions program that was sponsored by the Center, presented by the Center for Leadership, and that he has allowed us to be a part of the Foundation's commitment to developing young leaders for our community through the Miami Fellows Program. We're delighted to have Javier with us today. Please help me welcome Javier Soto.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Myra. Thank you to the Center on Leadership. I didn't expect the laptop to be up here, by the way. So first, I want to give a shout out to a couple of folks who, whenever I come on FIU's campus, I instantly think about. One is my good friend Mitch Mydeek, really built this institution into a world-class and leading university in our country, and who obviously is a force behind the Center for Leadership because he understood the need to invest in emerging leaders for this community. And to my other good friend, Mark Rosenberg, the current president of FIU, for continuing to believe in the Center for Leadership and for investing so much of his personal time and his team's time in making this community greater. FIU has become much more integral to everything that happens in Miami as a result of the vision of both of those amazing leaders. I also often think when I come on FIU's campus about a summer that I spent here as a student. I didn't graduate from FIU, but I did spend a summer here. I was a student at Florida State. And to give you a sense for how long ago this was, the two classes I took were theater and Soviet foreign policy. So my job at the Miami Foundation is to sell Miami. I sell Miami for a living. That's frankly, what I do. And I consider this to be a pretty easy proposition when you compare us to places like New York and Boston. And why do I say that? Well, I say that because we here in Miami are literally building a great global city as we speak. New York has been around for a very long time. New York has seen it all. The city's been around for centuries, and so have many of the institutions that helped to build the civic fiber of that town. Miami, on the other hand, is barely 100 years old. And if I were to take two pictures and put them side by side on the screen of New York 50 years ago and Miami 50 years ago, you'd see that there was a lot going on in New York 50 years ago. Now, granted, there's a lot more today, but there was already a lot 50 years ago in New York. The picture of Miami 50 years ago, you'd have the Freedom Tower, you'd have the courthouse, you wouldn't have a whole lot else. In 50 years, this community has exploded in terms of its growth. That's unique for people like yourselves to be in a situation where you can build one of the great global capitals. And so we are still defining this community identity and the people and the systems that will help to shape it. This also nurtures an immense appetite for innovation, for new solutions, and for ambitious thinking. It also brings about the need for effective leadership. Leadership that will keep us on track and inspire others to pursue audacious goals. That's why the Miami Foundation invests in the leadership pipeline through programs like the Miami Fellows. And I think there's a few graduates of the program. The Miami Fellows, if you all could give a wave. It's also why it's so important to recognize emerging leaders like Vance, a Miami Fellows alum as well, and more critically, to give them the reins to help set Miami's agenda for the future. I recently met a guy named Henry Timms. Henry runs the 92nd Street Y in New York City. Henry also is the co-creator of Giving Tuesday. Henry recently, about a year ago, wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review about new power models versus old power models and how society is moving from the old power structures to new power structures and what implications that has for communities, for organizations, and for leaders. The old power model is top-down. Small groups of people controlling resources, controlling power, and making decisions for everybody else. Miami was a very old power kind of place. A city where leadership was defined by the company or organization that you led and how big it was. Decision makers encompassed mostly CEOs. And while their names sought to disguise this reality, the non-group operated exactly in this way. They did so for several decades until about 15 years ago, when that changed and the non-group was disbanded. Many people bemoaned the demise of the non-group. And don't get me wrong, these folks were well-intentioned, and these folks contributed significantly to that growth of Miami. But the world changed, and Miami changed even more. As a result, Miami was ahead of the curve in getting to a new power model of leadership. So new power models are bottom-up. They are exceedingly democratic. They are meant to be hard to control. They are made possible by the ease and breadth of new media and communication tools. Today, crowdsourced grassroots movements can place anyone at the head of a table. With an idea and the passion to make it happen, leaders can emerge from anywhere and have a real impact. Take another Miami Fellows alum, Frankie Ruiz, who in a couple of years has turned a network of informal running clubs into a movement of hundreds of advocates for parks and trails in our community. And just last night, I saw on his Facebook page that he's mobilizing that network to provide supplies, relief supplies, to the victims of the earthquake in Ecuador just a couple of days ago. This is why we created the Public Space Challenge at the Miami Foundation. Public Space Challenge allows anyone with an idea to get money and help to create or improve a park in their neighborhood. Anyone. Can be an individual, can be a school association, can be anyone. And it's why we created Give Miami Day, so that anyone can be a philanthropist. In a new power world, all you need is an idea, a few people willing to make it happen, And you can create opportunities that transform communities. These new leadership dynamics have not been lost on some of our established institutions in town. Rather than working within outdated constructs, forward-thinking organizations provide the platform, the resources to promising leaders for them to bring about change however they see fit. Look at what our friends at Knight Foundation have done. Our past Ruth Shack Leadership Award winner, Felicia Hatcher, has used Knight support to bring Miami's explosive tech startup growth into communities of color through Code Fever and Black Tech Week. In an old power, non-group kind of world, that success, virtually overnight, would be much more difficult. But using a new power network, that's exactly what she did. More and more organizations see no need for top-down control over efforts to shape this city. Seasoned leaders are providing the resources and guidance, passing the torch, and letting the next generation of city builders get to work. This is at the heart of what David Lawrence has done for Vance. But more importantly, it's at the heart of the organization that he created, the Children's Movement of Florida. See, movements are part of the new power wave. A world dominated by oligarchs does all it can to keep movements from emerging. There's a reason this organization is not called the Children's Agenda of Florida. This isn't about a handful of well-heeled, well-intentioned people taking your private jet to Tallahassee to advocate on behalf of children. It's about the creation of a movement that invites everyone to the table, a movement that is fueled by passion, a movement that lifts thousands of voices, a movement that isn't easy to control, but once unleashed, produces transformational and long-lasting change. Now, to create such a movement, a leader must be confident, adaptive, passionate, and have a deep faith in the potential of good people working tirelessly towards a common goal to change the world. In short, that leader must embrace a new power model of leadership, even if they spent the bulk of their career in an old power construct. Dave Lawrence is this kind of leader, and he will go down as one of the most consequential leaders in the history of the state of Florida. Thank you, Dave. And today we celebrate a new leader who shares all of these same qualities. By passing the torch to Vance, Dave has empowered an ethical and effective young leader who is a very embodiment of new power thinking. Vance has helped build the children's movement by using new media and decentralizing power. This has resulted in some very big wins just this past session in Tallahassee, like the passing of a bill eliminating the 5-year waiting period for kid care, ensuring health insurance for over 17,000 legal immigrant children in our state. I know this is just the beginning of what Vance and the movement will achieve in the years to come. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to find many 32-year-olds running organizations of this magnitude and this importance in other states around the country. And as someone who sells Miami for a living, I can tell you that's a value proposition unique to us. So what's next? We have an emerging core of young leaders in this town. We have increasing numbers of organizations and people willing to invest in their ideas for change. We have forward-thinking, seasoned leaders handing over the reins. Now it's time to think about how we position this talent to tackle the broader issues facing Miami. It's important to know about Miami that we are the most resilient community in this country. I was just in New York last week meeting with the president of Rockefeller Foundation that invests greatly in building resilience in cities around the world. And we are attempting to have Miami come into a cohort called 100 Resilient Cities that Rockefeller supports. And I said that to her. I said, Miami is the most resilient city in this country. And I don't think she had ever considered that to be so. And so I went through the history of resilience in this community. This community, if you study the history of Miami, going back again just barely 100 years, it's been boom and bust from inception. Miami got built and was almost immediately wiped out by a hurricane. We've had, as you all know, in the very recent time, significant financial hardship and real estate crashes in this community. Miami has bounced back time and time again from those boom and bust cycles. We certainly have had our fair share of natural disasters. Most of you in this room, I assume, weren't around for Hurricane Andrew, but those of us who were know that it was complete and utter devastation about half of this community. We've had urban disturbances in this town long before Black Lives Matter and some of the things that we've witnessed on our TV screens over the past couple of years. We've had immigration waves that all of a sudden seem to be on the radar nationally. We've been dealing with immigration waves in this community for a very long time. And through it all, we've overcome. And we've grown even greater as a community and as a city. So that's why I say that this is the most resilient community in America. Because when the chips are down, no matter where we came from, we are all in for the 305. And you can hashtag that, all in for the 305. Today our challenges go beyond isolated events and stretch across a much longer arc of time. The slim, affordable housing options and widespread need for transportation solutions make it hard for young talent like yourselves to establish roots here. The growing number of young lives being cut short on our streets shakes the very foundation of our community. And of course, perhaps the biggest threat that this community has ever faced, sea level rise continues to slowly but surely creep onto our doorstep and endanger the livelihoods of everyone in Miami-Dade. So while Vance fights to ensure the well-being of Florida's children, where's the Vance fighting to make sure Miami is able to live with water rather than be washed away by it? Where's the Vance working with county leaders to develop a vision for urban mobility in Miami? Where's the Vance fighting with every fiber of their being to keep the gun lobby, the drug dealers, and the gangbangers from taking the life of the next King Carter? I know those Vances are out there. In fact, I know many are in this room. It's why we continue and will continue to identify, equip, and propel new leaders to shake up old power models and build one of the greatest cities on the planet. Because in Miami, you can do that. Thank you very much. And so now it's my privilege to introduce to you Dale Chapman Webb from the Alva H. and Wileen P. Chapman Foundation, as well as Isham Sicharan, Managing Director and Associate General Counsel at Goldman Sachs & Company, and a member of the FIU Center for Leadership's Board of Advisors.
Thank you, Javier. It is so great to be back at FIU. Aside from representing my family through the Family Foundation, I spent 16 years here, first planning and then leading as Vice President of University Advancement a major capital campaign. So it's wonderful to connect back with my colleagues and to see the students and realize the leadership that Florida International University provides to our community. So that's something that has grown through the years, and I was honored to be part of a leading institution. The Emerging Leader Award that we present today was developed to represent and recognize a new generation of leaders who are providing innovative solutions to social and business challenges and improving the quality of life in our community. Today we are honored to be here to honor an individual who is part of this new generation of leaders. He has dedicated his very young life to create a new face for child advocacy in Florida and also focused on improving the life of our community in Miami through the creation of communities that see their very future in the youngest of their citizens. I am pleased to announce that this year's emerging leader is Mr. Vance Aloupis. Yeah.
So I'm not Vance. Javier so brilliantly gave you some of the thematic things that Vance works on. I get the pleasure of giving you the detail. There's this great joke that I love to repeat that had, I need a graph to do this, but you can visualize it in your mind. What success looks like, and with 2 dots, one where you start from and one where you end, and you draw a straight line, and what success is. And it's a really curly line going in all different directions before you end up at the end. And it takes a lot of hard work and dedication and engagement in order to do that. And I think what Javier described and what Vance embodies is that hard work and engagement. And you're going to get to hear from him soon, but let me give you a little more of the background that helps you understand where you are and may get you closer to understanding where he is and how you can follow in his footsteps. Through his work at the Children's Movement, Vance has helped to raise the awareness of early childhood education not only in Miami, but across Florida. Both within Miami-Dade County and beyond, Vance has developed coalitions with advocates, business leaders, and educators, and elected officials who meet regularly to discuss their collective impact both on a community and state level. As a 32-year-old father of 2, with a law degree from the University of Miami, Vance is not your typical child advocate. He speaks with an ever-youthful optimism and meanwhile applies his analytical education and his significant common sense to remain skeptical but never cynical. Over the past few years, Vance has traveled the state gathering support, meeting with elected officials, and speaking to audiences, all on behalf of the future of children. Early childhood education is an issue that is at the tipping point of becoming part of the national conversation. And Vance has worked hard to ensure that this is a dialogue that is encompassing of all children, all parents, all caregivers, and most important, all Floridians. A graduate of Harvard Business School's Strategic Perspectives and Nonprofit Management program, Vance was selected as one of 90 young professionals from across America to join in the first cohort of HBS's Young American Leaders program. As David Lawrence Jr. noted in his nomination of Vance, his work builds from his great core values: honesty, integrity, hardworking, eager to make a difference. My headline for Vance is, I know of no limit to his potential. I can think of no greater honor to give someone, and I look forward to seeing that potential in the future play out even further with further successes beyond this one.
This recognition symbolizes the aspiration to transcendent leadership to be pursued by each new generation, to build a better world by engaging with society to create solutions in tangible and practical ways, as Vance has done. At this time, it is my honor on behalf of the Center for Leadership, Florida International University, and the Alva H. and Wileen P. Chapman Foundation to present the 2015 Emerging Leadership Award to Vance Aloupis. Please congratulate him. Do you want us to step?
Hello? Fantastic. How's everybody doing? So I have a secret. As Bisham said, I have 2 degrees from the University of Miami. Okay? I took a tour of your school today. I made the wrong decision. This has to be one of the most spectacular campuses I have ever been on in my entire life. All of you are so blessed and so lucky, and I know that you know that, so congratulations. I'm not going to give a presentation today, and this message is really for the students in the room, so all of the older folk, I apologize. Those of you who were born during Hurricane Andrew, this is not going to be relevant to you. But I really want to have a conversation. But I want to start by thanking some very important people. See, I mentioned this at lunch, it's very dangerous to give awards to young people, because you begin to think that you actually know something. And I'll tell you this, and I'm going to try and impart some wisdom. As you get older, you're going to want to share wisdom. You probably want to share wisdom that you have as your 18, 19, 20-year-old self with your 13-year-old self. So I'm 32 years old. I'm 10 years older than most of you, and I feel compelled to tell you a few things that I hope you can then therefore apply and miss some of the missteps that I have made. But this award is in no way a reflection of my leadership. And I'm going to try and not get emotional. Garth Headley told me I should drink water so I don't cry, which is a weird trick he told me. But I just want to say my mom's here today, which is a big deal. So can we clap for her? This award is in every way a reflection of the people that I get to work with. I have a number of my colleagues here today who are, without a doubt, some of the most creative, some of the brightest, some of the most passionate people I could ever imagine working with. And they make me better, they make me work harder, they keep me in check. Last week, just so you know, we try and have a nice culture in our office. We had Twin Day, and 2 of my colleagues dressed up like me. And they had been watching me over the course of the week and figuring out all my little idiosyncrasies. Apparently I say thank you so much more often than I should, so every time I said something, they would say, thank you so much, Vance. It was very awkward. But having a chance to work with people who you know care about you as an individual and care about the cause is a blessing that I don't take for granted. And Javier mentioned it. I can still remember the day. It was in June of 2010. I had the opportunity to meet an individual who has not only transformed my life, but has transformed this community. And that's David Lawrence Jr. And I just want to thank you for. If you ever, my prayer and my hope for all of you is that you're able to, at some point, hook your wagon to somebody like Dave. That you can learn through osmosis sort of some of the incredible skills and traits of leadership that individuals like Dave have. And that has been one of the greatest blessings of my work. So this is not going to be a presentation. I was talking to Garth in advance of this, and he said, well, I want you to talk about how to build a movement. I want you to talk about how to get civically engaged. I want you to talk about your lessons in leadership and the wisdom you want to impart on these students. And I thought, well, I got 20 minutes, and I think it would be a disservice to every movement ever launched to think that I could explain how to build a movement in 20 minutes, because I'll tell you right now, we have yet to build a movement. We are trying to build a movement. And Javier makes an incredible point. Movements are changing. Occupy Wall Street and Black Lives Matter, people may say, oh, they're not making a difference, but we're in an entirely new landscape. The conversation about civic engagement, this is civic engagement. I hope no one's getting credit for being here. If you're getting credit, raise your hand. Okay, Javier, fantastic. You still haven't graduated from 10 years ago. This is civic engagement. I'm not going to tell you why you need to be civically involved. You're in the Honors College at Miami-Dade College because you know the importance of being a part of your community. And the reality, and we talked about it at lunch, is we live in a world in which far too few people are truly engaged in what's happening in their home. And finally, wisdom. I don't have any. I need as much wisdom as anybody in this room. And again, as I said, all I can do is provide you with some of the lessons, some of the missteps that I have made in hopes that you don't make them. And then it's upon you, I lost my clicker, it's upon you to make the decision as to whether or not you want to apply it to your life. I also want to give a quick shout out to my Miami Fellows family. Guys. Another blessing of life. I feel like I'm getting so old. My kids are going to kill me. Another blessing of life is to have friends who show up. And the power of just being there for your colleagues is, again, an incredible blessing. So the children's movement. I believe that every social movement in the history of humanity has been about one thing. Every social cause we focus our energies on, almost every nonprofit, civic engagement at the end of the day, it's about one thing. It's about equity. How do we create a world in which every child born in any zip code to any parents in any school has the same opportunities to have the same trajectory, the same future that any child would have? I was thinking back, and equity has never existed in the history of humanity. For those creationists in the room, maybe it existed in the Garden of Eden, and then Eve came along, and then we're off to the races. We've never had equity in this world. And everything we do in our movement is about figuring out how do we address the inequities of this community. Javier is bullish on Miami, and I'm bullish on Miami too. But there was an article this past week in the Miami Herald that talked about life expectancy in this community. And I want you to really understand this. There are two communities immediately adjacent to one another in our county, where if you're born in one community, you will live 15 years longer than you will in another community. This should infuriate every person in this room. The reality is that most of the children in some of these at-risk communities will never get to the point that we would want for all of our children because of inequity. So the question that I always ask is, how do we level the playing fields? This is not equity of outcomes. This is not I need to have the same house or the same car, the same salary. No, this is equity of opportunity. If there's anyone in this room who would disagree in fundamental fairness that every child, regardless of zip code, should not have the same opportunities to achieve his or her own dream, then tell me. And I'll tell you you're a bad person. So that's what our movement at its core is about. So what has been the greatest tool? And this is a question for the audience. You all are the honor students, and I'm taking this lesson from my board chair, Davey, likes to ask questions. Hey, Christine. What is the greatest tool for equality, for equity that we know of in this country? Raise your hand. Come on, guys. Honors college. Education. Fantastic. Great answer. Okay. So let's assume for the sake of argument, and it's not the only tool for equity, but let's assume for the sake of argument that that education is the greatest tool for promoting equity that human civilization has ever known. The reality in this room is that many of you are here today because of a teacher, because of a class, because of a mentor who pushed you further than anyone else thought you could be pushed. Education for so many has allowed them to achieve the dreams that were never expected for them. So if I'm trying to create a movement, if we're trying to create a movement, my question is, well, when does the inequity begin? When does it start? And if education is that tool, then when do we insert it? Because the reality in this country is that we see education through what construct? K through 12, right? And for some lucky folks, they get to go on to higher education like all of you will. But I want to show you a graph real quick. So this graph represents three different children. The children on the bottom line are children living in welfare. These are children whose parents are living in poverty. The children on the middle line are children living in working class families. Lower middle class, parents may have a high school education. And the top line are for children in college educated parents. These are going to be your homes. Okay? And what we're assessing here is cumulative vocabulary, very basic. How many words does a child know? And as you look at this graph, oh, fantastic. If you look at this graph, you can see that equity exists, at least in cumulative vocabulary, until this point. And very quickly, you see that the children of the college-educated parents take a far steeper trajectory toward the top, while their counterparts, again, same age, the counterparts living in welfare or even in working class homes begin to plateau out. So my question is, what's happening right here? How old are these children? And if education is that great tool for equity, then how do we use it to address it right here? So I've deliberately removed the x-axis here so you have no idea how old these children are. So I want you to let this sink in for a second. This is a child of 18 months. Okay? If education is our great equalizer, this child right here, who is already beginning to manifest inequities amongst his or her peers, is 3.5 years before he or she ever meets their kindergarten teacher. Okay? We need to begin to change the perspective of how we view education, how we address inequities, because the reality is it's starting long before public education. And that's what the pursuit of our organization is. To figure out how do we change mindsets. How many of you use the term daycare in sort of the way you talk about a place where a child would go? Raise your hand. Okay. Stop. Daycare is a very real reality in this community. There are places where children are put during the day for 8 to 10 hours, and the only expectation is that those children are healthy and safe at the end of the day. Children need to be more than healthy and safe. Children need brain-stimulating environments. Children need to grow emotionally, cognitively, physically, socially. And if we're allowed to, if we continue to permit this perception that all we want for our children is daycare, then we are never going to help these children. I'll show you one more slide and then I'll get into sort of the meat of this presentation. Very similar breakdown to what we saw in the previous slide, although this is actually measuring the gray matter in a child's brain. Again, at 11 months, you see the inequities begin to manifest themselves. Gray matter is the part of the brain that allows for executive function, allows for decision-making, behavior control. These are all of you are behaving right now. Could you imagine how disruptive it would be if the gentleman in the back just started screaming at me? He clearly has a lot of gray matter. In all seriousness, this is changing the physical structures of children's brains. And poverty is doing it. And if we really are promoting equity and we believe education is that great equalizing tool, then when should we start? This is our vision for Florida. This is our vision for this organization. As Javier said, movements are evolving. I want Florida to be the best state in the nation for young children. That's all I want. I want Florida to be the best state in the nation for young children. And you might say, Vance, God, that's really gelatinous. That's really amorphous. I don't even know what that means. No. We can quantify this. We can hold up significant domains to show whether or not Florida is the best state in the nation for young children. But the reality is this. You know, we're 49th in the country in total of number of uninsured children in this state who don't have access to health insurance. Javier talked about legislation we passed this most recent session that allowed for 17,000 more children to have health insurance. I can tell you right now, the reason I live in Florida is because I was a very sick kid growing up. My mom moved us out of the Northeast in 1992, in August. What happened in August of 92? Andrew, none of you were alive. But I was moving. We moved to South Florida in 1992 because my sister and I, I'm one of 9 children. I'm number 5, which is the worst place to be in 9 children. And I have 7 sisters, which is the worst place to be ever. But we moved our family because my sister and I had such severe immune deficiencies that we simply couldn't overcome the sicknesses that we were getting. And we were missing classes in kindergarten and first grade. And my childhood, I can remember my friends getting leukemia and dying. I can remember my friends getting cystic fibrosis and their lungs expanding and them not making it to their 8th and 9th birthdays. What would my life have looked like if I didn't have a relationship with a pediatrician? What would my life look like if my parents didn't have access to resources and couldn't make good decisions and move our family 2,000 miles away so their kids could be healthy? I want this state to be the best state in the nation for young children. And here's what I want us to do over the next 5 years. Those 400,000 children, I want to make sure that every child in this state has access to health insurance. This is fundamental. And the reality is this. Today, 275,000 children could have access to health insurance if we could just enroll them. But too often we don't provide the outreach, we don't provide the information around enrollment, and we make it very difficult for parents. Our second, we talked about early education. We talked about when does education really begin. In this state, I was talking to a woman earlier today who runs a subsidized child care program. We have 60,000 children in this state who are fully eligible for high-quality early learning programs. But because we as a state don't make it a priority, these children are made on the waiting list, unable to get access. These are those children on that bottom line who need these services the most. And finally, we need to create the most comprehensive parent resource system in the country. I'm a father of a 5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old. I'm telling you right now, folks, and this is the best wisdom you're going to get, you have no idea what stress is if you don't have kids. It is insane. My mom's laughing. It is absolutely, trust me. We need to find real ways to engage parents and support them in making healthy and accurate decisions on behalf of their children. So that's what our organization is about. As Javier noted, we're not taking private jets up to Tallahassee with rich people. Yes, we want rich people involved, but this is a movement. This is not the children's PAC. This is not the children's lobby. We need to figure out, how do I change every mind in this room? I hope you looked at that graph and for just a moment you think, maybe we do need to invest earlier. Maybe education doesn't begin in kindergarten. And that's what we need to do across the state. So I have the blessing of working with our team, with Dave, with individuals across the state in this pursuit. And as I said, we have not yet built a movement. But I'm going to give my life to figure out how we do it. And one of the great blessings, and I hope you realize this, one of the great blessings of life is to wake up every morning excited about what you do. And I hope you can get a sense of that from the way I talk about this. There's nothing else I want to do. I want to figure out how we address this issue because I believe this will literally change the state we live in. All right, now, so this is where it's going to get a little bit dangerous here because I'm going to try and give you some wisdom. And this is for all the students here, not for the Miami Fellows or the important people in the front. So how do you build a movement and how do you grow as an individual? Whatever you decide to do, whether you want to make millions and millions of dollars, you want to have the most effective nonprofit, you want to be a true philanthropist, you want to run for office, you must understand your community. About 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to teach a group of 25 AmeriCorps public allies. These are young people between the ages of 18 and 25. We have one in our office now. Natalie Diaz is currently going through the year. They make a fortune. They make $14,000 a year, which is below poverty, just so you know. I was talking to these 25 people, all of whom have been put into nonprofits across this community for capacity building. These are the most idealistic people you will ever meet. All they care about is making Miami better. And I was talking to them about our organization and what we're trying to do. And I can remember talking about, this was 2 years ago, and there was a very important story in the newspaper, and I hope you're all reading the newspaper. We could talk about that later. But there was a story in the newspaper about the president of Miami-Dade College, a gentleman by the name of Eduardo Padron. And as I'm talking about this story, I look across all 25 faces, and everyone's sort of just looking at me like this. They have no idea what I'm talking about. So I said, how many of you read this story? One person raises their hand, and it's the gentleman who's actually working in our office. So I dug a bit deeper. I said, how many of you know who Eduardo Padron is? These are 25 people who are trying to change Miami. One person, the young man who worked in our office, was the only person who knew who this transcendent leader was. If you don't understand your community, to put it in the way that I think Dave does it best, you read the paper because you want to know who is doing what to whom. You cannot be an engaged citizen. If this is about civic engagement, you cannot be civically engaged if you don't understand what is happening in your community. You cannot build a movement if you are not actively pursuing a path to figure out how a community operates, how it works, and understanding that you will never fully understand a community. Dave will tell you right now, Dave's been in this community for a significant period of time. He will tell you now that this community is changing faster than it's probably ever changed. As we've built this movement, we've done this across the state. It has started in Miami-Dade County, but my colleagues here, we've been to every single corner, Jacksonville, Pensacola, Naples, Ocala, Orlando, Volusia, Flagler. We've been all over this place. Miami's the best, just so you know. But the reality is this. If you think that you're going to go to Panama City and bring the same message that you're using in Miami-Dade County, trying to engage the same people, you are going to be sorely mistaken. See, the reality is the message of the children's movement, this idea that we can create the best state in the nation for young children, people in Panama City want that message. They want to believe in that vision. They want to believe that in Jacksonville, and they want to believe it in the Keys. But you need to understand communities in order to be effective. Know where you're going. And this is very nuanced, and I don't want you to think that I'm trying to tell you that you need to know exactly what you're doing, because if you can tell me right now what you want to be doing in 15 years, I'm not going to have a lot of faith in you. When I joined the organization, I still remember this so well. I had just practiced law for a few years. I've been about a month into the organization. It was September 5th, 2010. I can actually remember the date. We were about to launch the organization in Pensacola. And I can remember the night before the first rally we were going to have 17 rallies across the state, driving around in a big blue bus, raising awareness about the importance of early childhood. I can remember sitting, I'm not going to say any names because I don't want to incriminate anyone, but I can remember sitting across the table from a very significant person in our state. And it was the first time I ever met him. And they asked me my name. I'll give you the pronoun he. He asked me my name. I said, my name is Vance. He said, Vance, what's your 15-year plan? And in me and my snarky youthfulness, I said, well, sir, if you had told me 15 weeks ago that I'd be sitting in a Holiday Inn Express in Pensacola with you about to set off on a 30-day bus tour about early childhood, I would have told you you're crazy. So I'm really not worried about the next 15 years. But you sure as heck better believe that I knew where I was going. That what drove me was purpose. That what drove me was equity. And I'm not saying that needs to be what your purpose is. But I would challenge each of you to begin to figure that out. Is it wealth? Is it status? Is it knowledge? What are you pursuing? And begin to move in that direction, but be open to unexpected routes getting there. When we launched this movement 6 years ago, we knew what we wanted to do. We wanted children to be the highest priority in our state. We wanted Florida to be the best state in the nation for young children. We had no idea how to get there. But you sure as heck better believe we knew where we were going. And as long as we knew where we were going, we were willing to make mistakes, we were willing to iterate, and we were willing to keep pushing forward. I think that is a very clear metaphor for each of us in our own lives. And I would challenge you to really begin thinking about where it is you want to go and always remain flexible for the unexpected routes. And finally, sacrifice. All of you got a book, and I'm really grateful to the center that they gave all. This is a book called Freedom Summer. It's one of the best books that I've read in the last 5 or 6 years. It was recommended to me by Dave, talking about 1964 Mississippi and the SNCC movement, the Students Nonviolent Coordinating Council, and bringing the voting rights to African Americans in Mississippi. And when we think about sacrifice as a movement, we can all name the names of individuals that we knew lost their lives for movements, people like Martin Luther King. But the names we don't remember are in this book. Names like Mickey Schwerner and James Chaney and Andrew Goodman, young men, 2 white and 1 black, who literally lost their lives because they believed in something better for their country. Buried in shallow graves, beaten to death by the people of a community. Sacrifice will be real in every movement. I don't walk into my office every day and say to the staff, guys, get ready to die today. That's not, I think they'd probably leave. But you better believe that I expect sacrifice. You better believe that I expect sacrifice. Because again, to go back, and again, I want you to understand what this man has meant to me. To use a terminology that Dave uses. It's hard to change the world if you're working 9 to 5. That this needs to be more than just a job. And you need to be willing to sacrifice. And one of my good friends, Phil Pokert, is here, and he heard us talking about it this past weekend in a smaller group of people our age. At some point, all of you, you're probably not thinking about work-life balance at this point. You're probably not. And if you are, then you're ahead of the game. But here's the kicker. Here's the spoiler. It doesn't exist. Okay? It doesn't exist. You need to figure out what your priorities are, what matters to you. And I'm not telling you that building a movement is right and being a good father is wrong. I'm not. But you need to figure out what the balance is. And I get emotional talking about this because this is a very real struggle that I have. And the question of, I have 2 young kids, 2.5 and 5, and I have to spend a lot of time away from them. And at the end of the day, we talked about this, and Phil knows, you have to ask yourself every single day, as I'm flying through the night on airplanes going to who knows where in Florida, and I know that my wife is alone reading to our kids and I can't be there, I have to ask myself, is it worth it? Is it worth it? And the only place I can sort of find comfort in is I know that if we succeed, if we build an organization that truly makes Florida the best state in the nation for all children, if we address that graph and make sure that all of those lines coincide and they all shoot to the stars, that regardless of any zip code you live in this community, those circumstances will not dictate your future, then absolutely the sacrifice was worth it. And I just want you to know the sacrifice, these questions will be around the corner for all of you. And I know my colleagues in the Miami Fellows we're answering these questions now. But that is my challenge to you. This is what we want. I want you to write, this is what we want. And we will get there. I leave you with this quote from Herbert Hoover. For those of you who don't know, he was a president. Not a vacuum guy. I think there's real power in this quote. If we could have but one generation of properly born, trained, educated, and healthy children, 1,000 other problems of government will vanish. Those words still ring true today. So whatever movement, whatever cause you tie yourself to, I wish you all the best. Promote equity, commit to sacrifice, and leave this world better than your parents left it to you. Thank you so much. You want me to do a few questions? So I know we only have a few minutes. I would love to answer any questions or stay as long after to talk to anyone. Any questions that are immediately popping to people's minds? Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Stein Jean, and I thank you for your lecture. Very inspiring. My question really pertains to the immigrant community. How does the movement pertain to the causes of poverty or child development within the immigrant community?
That's a great question. So we have set out, this movement is about every child. And Dave has been very clear about that, really from the inception, but before that, when he was creating things like the Children's Trust here in Miami, it's always about all children and never those children. So it's not immigrant children or undocumented children or poor children or rich children. It's about all children. And the reality is the legislation that we passed this most recent session was specifically geared toward children who are lawfully residing immigrant children. And the variables that are going to raise that child are going to be the same elements that are going to raise any child. So our movement is fully inclusive. And that is really something that is the foundation for all the work that we do. Yes, sir.
First, thank you for coming here. My name is Ahmed Mirtari. I'm a PhD candidate at Political Science Department here. And sometimes I teach my own course, so I have this experience in terms of education. And also, since I'm research fellow at Middle Eastern Studies here, I work extensively on education system in Arab countries like Saudi Arabia. One important question is the fact that how these institutions are working, but not how we can push children inside them, and how they can provide actual knowledge that they can help them in practice. So this is another question. I'm training many students each semester, but to be honest with you, for more than half of them, I don't see good future in terms of training and how this training is going to help them. And when you're talking about poor families, it's much more important than a rich family, because eventually a rich family can send a kid to a good school like Harvard, Princeton, Stanford. But when we are talking about poor families, we are also talking about institutions who are not well established, and they're dealing with many issues. I'm not talking about FIU. FIU maybe is a huge exception because things are changing radically here. But there are many other institutions here, like Kaiser University. Are they actually training people if even we provide opportunity to young children to go to these institutions? So this is another issue. I'm not questioning the whole thing. I understand that step by step. But
I understand your question, and I think the point is this, is that there's no silver bullet. That in education reform, we have begun to try and address it through vouchers and charter schools and teacher merit pay and high-stakes testing, and we're trying to figure out how to fix the full system. And I understand you're dealing with students at a much later phase of life. And what we are trying to say is that all of that is good, all of that is important, all of that is essential. But the root cause of the problem is that children are starting life significantly behind. And you mentioned something about poverty. I don't want anything I showed you today to suggest that poor parents can't raise sensational children. Okay? I know a lot of rich parents who have terrible children. I know a lot of them. A lot. But I want you to understand that it's a very real struggle. And when you're working multiple jobs, my wife is a school teacher. She taught third grade and kindergarten, and she was working a lot harder than I was when I was an attorney. I mean that. Being paid significantly less. But the reality is we were able to make the decision for my wife to stay at home with our girls so that she was able to help really sort of shepherd them through those early childhood years. That's not the reality for a lot of people. So our conversation at this point, because we have to remain very, very focused in what we do, is about how do we ensure that every child is being put on a level playing field once we can get them into kindergarten. And then, again, we're going to have more issues once we get into kindergarten, but let's start children off on the same footing. Yes?
Hi, my name is Jennifer. Thank you for coming.
Of course.
Apart from getting real young kids into school as opposed to daycare, are there any kind of outreach programs that you've been working on in low-income communities or things like that that can, in addition to school, that can help these kids and these parents succeed?
I think the most important thing that we do as an organization, and I know our team will agree, is that nothing is more important in the long-term success of a child than a caring and knowledgeable parent. So we have worked tirelessly to figure out how to bring resources to parents, because at the end of the day, whether or not you're in an early childhood center, you're only there for 8 to 10 hours a day. The children are then going home. And one of the great studies over the last 10 or 15 years has been this conversation about the 30 million word gap. And they started actually counting the number of words children were hearing in their home in language-rich environments. And they found that by the age of 4, children living in high-income homes had heard 30 million more words than the children living in poverty. So we need to continue to figure out how to support parents. One of the things, again, that Dave talks about all the time is that early learning lessons can happen at the grocery store. You can walk around and talk. I do it with my daughter. You talk about how many apples. I need you to get 6 apples. What color are these apples? What color are those apples? You can have these conversations whether you're literate or not. And we need to begin to, again, I believe it begins with understanding. I believe it begins with changing perception. I think as a society, we continue to use words like daycare because we don't see the early learning years as educational. Give me this is another question. What do you think the average pay is for an early learning teacher in Florida? If you know, don't raise your hand because I want to surprise everyone. Really low. $30,000 or $32,000 a year is what I've heard over here. The average salary for an early learning teacher in this state is $9 an hour. This is about priorities, and this is about perspective. So, again, I think to your point, we need to continue to find ways to get more children into high-quality early learning environments, but we need to really figure out how to support families. Yes?
I have a question about your statistics, your graphs that you showed with the number of words and the 30 million. Perhaps does that not include the amount of words that are spoken in a bilingual or multilingual home? And if you say that your program is inclusive for immigrant people speaking multiple languages in their home, how do you address the facilitation of these children to continue learning those languages additionally, especially if we know that bilingual people who speak multiple languages, bilingual students, think differently than people who only speak one language?
Absolutely. So there is, and again, I'm not an expert, but I'm going to go out on a limb here. There is incredible research to show the plasticity of the bilingual brain and what it means in terms of decision-making and executive function. Everything that I have read has suggested that it really doesn't matter which language you're speaking in. So if you're speaking Spanish or Portuguese or Russian or French, as long as the children are hearing words. And these early learning years, when I do this presentation on a much longer in a much longer platform, it's really looking at the architecture of the brain and what's happening during the years of 0 to 3. One of the statistics, and I know we hear it all the time, but I'm sure most people haven't heard it, is that 85% of all brain growth occurs before age 3. So figuring out if 85% of a child's cognitive development has been dictated before he or she's even in pre-K, then how are we making sure those early learning years are right? But your point's very well taken, and again, it's not the language that matters, but just that the children are hearing words and that they're having an engagement with an adult or a caregiver.
Hello, Vance. I want to thank you for coming to speak to us today. My name is Josh, and I'm a student at the Honors College. Just to put things in perspective, right now I'm interning in finance, my significant other works in civic engagement, and my mom works in healthcare. So I see the inequity you're talking about every day. And as one of the earlier speakers mentioned, Miami and South Florida in general is going through a lot of booms and busts. Right now we're in the middle of a boom. And when you bring up that statistic that shows that we're still 49th in the nation in terms of childcare, that's very frustrating because we know the city and the state could do better. With all the resources we have, and of course those statistics are what drive people away from our community and create a brain drain. What do you think is one of the biggest obstacles, or some of the biggest obstacles in this community in particular, from reaching our true potential in terms of childcare? Because resources are there. What's preventing it?
Okay, so did you hear what he said? He said resources are there. And you couldn't be more right. That in the state of Florida, we just passed the largest budget in the state's history. $82.3 billion were appropriated across this state. When we look at the education budget in Florida, it's usually one of the largest, along with healthcare. It's north of $20 billion. I just referenced, ma'am, in your question that 85% of brain growth occurs before children even get to kindergarten. Well, if you look at a percentage of that total education budget of $20+ billion, only 4% of that $20 billion is spent in the early childhood years. So it's a question, this is a question of priorities. What really matters? How do we change minds? How do I get more people? How do we get more people to understand that education begins before kindergarten? And at the end of the day, to your point, you're talking about childcare. That is not in and of itself a silver bullet. So much of the success we've had in early childhood in this state is a result of what has happened here in Miami-Dade County under the leadership of David Lawrence. A dedicated funding source in Miami-Dade where people are taxed for other people's children. It has aggregated more than $1 billion over the last decade to fund programs for intervention and prevention. Passed in 2008 with 85.4%. Try and find another issue in Miami-Dade where you get 85% of the people to agree on something. 85% of the people in Miami won't agree that my suit's blue. Okay? But you got 85% of the people in Miami-Dade County to say, you know what, this is important, this is about the future of our community, and we are willing to tax ourselves on behalf of it. It's a question of priorities. And I believe it's our responsibility to begin to change those perceptions.
Thank you.
Does this work? Okay, wonderful. My name is Aloupis, and I'm a graduate speech-language pathology student. So this lecture could not resonate anymore. I work with early intervention. This is language development, the 30 million word gap, the bilingual language acquisition. This is all my area. So this is wonderful. My specific question has to do with the resources that you are providing parents with, or that you want to provide parents with. Given this is a very diverse and culturally just very diverse community, and it's left and right, I don't know. What sort of things are you trying to do or bring that will hopefully reduce that 30 million word gap?
Yeah, great question. I imagine most of the parents are in the front 2 rows, so I'm just talking to the folks behind you. I have a law degree. I have an undergraduate degree, unfortunately not from FIU. My wife has a bachelor's degree, was a school teacher. Everything I am doing as a parent is mimicking what my parents did. Okay? I have access to all the resources, I have access to information, I have access to experts, but almost every opportunity I have to parent, I reflect back to how my parents parented me. The same goes for my wife, and then we move forward. The reality is that many parents, one, don't have access to the resources that they need to answer the question, let alone get the resources. And 2, a lot of people are mimicking bad parenting. And I think this issue transcends, this is not a poor, rich issue, because I have a lot of friends who I went to law school with who are very rich now. And they all have young children. One of them is Dan Espino. I'm kidding, Dan. You guys are running a nonprofit, hit up Dan. He's got a lot of money. But here's the reality. I talked to so many of my colleagues who I went through law school with. All of them are becoming partners at big law firms. They all have young children, and they're putting them in early learning center. And I'll say to them, hey, tell me about your center. Oh, it's fantastic. I say, oh, really? What's the curriculum? You right now could probably tell me more curriculum than I could tell you. The reality is they're paying $1,500 a month, and they don't know what the curriculum is. I said, well, what are the credentials of the teachers? These are the people who are raising your children. Credentials? What are you talking about? I said, well, what's the ratio between, teachers to children? How many children does each teacher have? I had no idea. I said, all right, Mr. Smart Attorney, Mrs. Smart Attorney, what do you know? Well, I know how much it costs and I know where it is. And the reality is this. These are some of the most highly educated people in our society, and they are still not asking the right questions. As we have worked tirelessly to figure out how do we support parents, I truly believe that there are significant resources in this community. We have done a terrible job fragmenting them in a way that it makes it very difficult for parents to access. One of the systems that we are working to help create is something called Help Me Grow, where it's a one-stop portal. Phone, web, text is what we hope to have in the future, where whatever question you have about your child's development, you're connected to a counselor and then connected to the resources in your community. And not only are you connected, the counselor follows back up to make sure you receive the resources you need. I don't think these are Herculean tasks, but in so many ways, as you will see once you go out into the adult world, we have created bureaucracies that I think oftentimes frustrate parents to the point where they just regress back to, how did my parents parent me? Or what is my friend doing? I like to tease my wife all the time because every night I go home, my daughters have some other terminal illness. And it's, the kid's got Ebola. I'm like, no, she doesn't. Get off Google. But I mean this. At the end of the day, the smartest thing we could do is invest in parents and give them the skills that they need to make good decisions on behalf of their kid. Yes.
One of the things I believe we should start by looking at ourselves as being privileged. We're all speaking from a position of privilege, and as a result, we are unable to get in there and really figure out how to get parents involved. And my parents, they have elementary school. I came here when I was 19. My daughter grew up in New York City. So coming to Florida, I definitely see a difference in education. How parents parent also is a little different. I traveled, my commute was 2 hours a day just to get her into a program that would facilitate and appreciate her learning style. Because in the lower socioeconomic neighborhood that I was in, they considered her to be far less, like she wasn't smart enough, she wasn't paying attention. But in actuality, she was operating on a 2-year, she was more advanced. She got into a gifted and talented program and excelled very well. But that's because I met the right people. And very often we are not able to tap in and really figure out how to help parents be parents and just be there, step down from where you are and see and help to see where people are coming from. I don't know if you...
I absolutely get your question. I would say two things. One, my God, is your daughter blessed to have you? Seriously. Is she blessed to have you? This is a resonating theme. It's about parents and figuring out how do we effectively support them. And to your point, and I agree 100% that it's not this top-down, I'm in the castle telling people what to do. No, it's how do we bring resources to parents in the way that they want to receive them. And again, I don't think there's a silver bullet to answer this question of how do we make Florida the best state in the nation for young children. But I believe to my core that it begins with parents, and it speaks to exactly what you're talking about. Or is this the last question? Okay. Yes. I think there are few people that parents trust more than their pediatrician. One of the challenges we have, and it was reflected by the 430,000 children who don't have access to health insurance, who are using the emergency room as their primary care. They have no relationship with a pediatrician. But your point is very well taken, and something that we we have begun to really focus a lot of our efforts on is how do we get this message into the hands of pediatricians. The program that I talked about, Help Me Grow, which is a parent resource system, one of our greatest partners is the Florida Pediatric Society. Because if you're having your well baby checkup with your pediatrician and then you have all these questions, the pediatrician says, I have the resource for you. It's right here. So absolutely. And again, I think this, I believe, and this will be my last comment because I know we're over time, this war will not be won by people like me or like the folks on our team. It's not going to be won by the usual suspects. When you see me coming, you know what I'm going to talk about. You know that I'm going to start getting on my soapbox and screaming to the mountains about early childhood. You know it, Tony. You know what I'm going to do. I need unusual suspects bringing this message to the masses. Dave has been so effective because he had a stellar career in journalism and decided to retire and dedicate every bit of his energy, more energy than everybody in this room, every bit of his energy to figuring out how do we build a movement for children. We need more people who are unusual suspects bringing this message to as many people as possible. And that's what this was about today. Because many of you, although a lot of you are in the School of Education, many of you are going to go off to run businesses. Many of you are going to get into elective office. And my hope is that as you're making those decisions, that will impact tens upon tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people. That you will remember that chart, and you'll remember when we begin to lose the race for equity and what you can do to fix it. Thank you so much.
Vance, thank you for sharing your clear passion and purpose, but your deep knowledge of the topic, which can be combined with your passion. And one of the reasons why we're such big fans of Vance is that this award is for him, but it's not about him. And that's a hallmark of many really effective leaders. It's not about them. It's about something bigger than them. So we want to thank you for sharing with us today. And on behalf of the Center for Leadership, again, congratulations. And thank you all for attending. We have a reception downstairs. Please feel free to join us for that. And look forward to a speaker series that we will start again. Many of you attend a number of the center events. We'll start that again up in the fall. Thanks again for being here today.